All right, well, forgive me for looking at my clock here off to the side, make sure I'm going to try and keep us on time here. I know it's a Saturday and folks have things going on, so hopefully this is a good use of your time. So I'm Matt Beagle Bourgault. I work for VSAC in our outreach program. And I have been working with students in a variety of roles, helping folks think about how to plan for and pay for college for quite a few years now. I'm currently the director of our talent search program, which is a program around the state that works with students to try and help them pursue and to attain their higher education goals. So today we are here in this breakout session to talk about scholarships. This is kind of one part of the overall financial aid process. So the previous session one of the previous sessions was around managing college costs, thinking about the overall picture of paying for college and other post-secondary education programs. So if you need a bigger overview of financial aid in general, I would recommend you can go to our website and you can find a recording of that at some point and just get information about the overall financial aid process. We are going to focus specifically on scholarships with this presentation, which is one type of funding that students can use to help pay for college. So what we're going to go over are some things that can help you be successful when thinking about searching for, applying for scholarships to try and increase your odds of actually getting a scholarship. We're going to talk about the process for searching for them, and then some other things to think about when you're looking at scholarships in particular. So first thing to talk about is just what is a scholarship? Well, actually, before I do that, just in terms of housekeeping, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A. That's probably the best place to put a question to make sure that they get answered. If you put it in the chat, sometimes it's easy to get buried. I'm here with Kirsten Bohm, who also works in our outreach program. So she is going to be monitoring the chat and the Q&A. So as questions come up, she'll bring them to me to answer them so that everybody can hear it. Either during the presentation if it's relevant, or if it makes sense to save it to the end, then I'll answer it at the end. So we'll hopefully have a little time at the end for some questions. So if you put a question in there doesn't get answered right away, it could be just because it makes sense to save it till the end. So that said, what is a scholarship? So a scholarship is money that students can get to help pay for the cost of college or some other programs that they may be attending after high school. So it's free money, as the title of this suggests. However, it's not completely free. It does take work to find scholarships and to apply for them, but it should not cost you any money to apply for them. We're going to get into a little bit more about that in a minute. But it's in general, a scholarship is someone has some money and they want to help students to pay for school, and they get to decide how they give those funds out. So it could be an individual, it could be a business, it could be a foundation, a bank, some other organization. Someone has some funds and they say, you know, it costs a lot of money to go to school. We're going to try to help some students out, but they get to decide who is going to get those funds, who will get that scholarship. So for example, you know, an organization may say, I want to really help students, you know, who live in Vermont, or it could be someone who says, you know, hey, my family member died and they left some money. We're going to start a scholarship fund for students who live in this town. So they get to decide exactly who's going to get those funds. And we'll get into, again, a little bit more about that. But there are a couple different types of scholarships. They can really be based on a lot of different factors: where someone lives, what they plan to study, what they may have done, who they are. When we talk about scholarships, one term that will come up is merit-based scholarships. So you may hear that term. A merit-based scholarship is simply a scholarship that is based on something that a student has done or has earned. So it could be academics, it could be test scores like the SAT, it could be athletics, it could be something else. Another type of scholarship, you may hear this term, is need-based scholarship. A need-based scholarship is based on a family and a student's financial circumstances. So those are kind of the two broad categories of scholarships. And a scholarship is essentially funds that you use to help pay for school. So there are different types of financial aid, such as loans, such as grants, such as work study. If you're unfamiliar with those, we're not going to go into the details of those right now, but a scholarship can ideally supplement any of those types of financial aid, or if a family is not eligible for any of those types of financial aid, it can be a supplement to what a family is expected to contribute to the cost of education. So that's how scholarships come into play when paying for college. So when people think about scholarships, they often have an idea of what a scholarship is. So let's go through some of the myths around what you might think a scholarship is and what it may or may not be. So one is that I'm not a great student, my grades aren't good enough, I'm not going to be eligible for a scholarship. So yes, some scholarships may be based on a student's academic performance, but not all of them are. So if a student is not the top of the class, the A student, maybe they find a scholarship where other things are factored into the eligibility for the scholarship. So grades aren't the most important thing or even a factor at all. Another one is that my family makes too much money, scholarships based on that, I'm not going to be eligible. So again, while that may be a factor, so family's financial circumstances might come into play, not all scholarships are based on a family's financial circumstances. So might not be an issue for a particular student or for a particular scholarship. Another one is that, scholarships are based on athletics. So yes, there are scholarships that schools give out based on whether a student is a good athlete. Most scholarships are not based on that. Even students who are eligible for athletic scholarships, very typically, it's not like they're going to get a full ride to a particular school for that. So if you're not athletic, there are plenty of scholarships where that's just not a factor at all. And there are some where it is a factor for some students. And then the other ones, I haven't chosen a major yet. So I don't know what I'm going to study. Again, some scholarships are going to be based on, students who do plan to go into engineering or nursing or who are already studying those things once they're in college, but it's not a factor for every scholarship. So because scholarships can be based on so many different things, all of these things, maybe they're a factor, but there are plenty of scholarships where these things are not a factor. So if you have the idea that a scholarship is based on one particular thing, that's generally not the case. All right, so let's talk about some things that can help you be successful as you're looking at scholarships. So when a student applies for financial aid, they are typically going to fill out the FAFSA, which is the free application for federal student aid. That is an application for federal funds. They may fill out the Vermont State Grant application. They may fill out college applications. For most of those, or for all of those, their communication is kind of a two-way thing. So if a student applies for the Vermont State Grant, for example, and something is missing in that application, VSAC administers that. They will reach out to the student and say, it looks like you're missing this form. You should complete this form if you want your grant application to be complete. You may get a reminder in your second year. You should fill out the grant application if you want to be eligible. For scholarships, the communication piece of it relies on the student. Student has to find scholarships and apply for them, and they have to be the one to submit the pieces of the application, and they have to be the one to be asking the questions. So if a student applies for a scholarship, it requires a letter of recommendation, for example. Not all do, but it might be a factor. Then they have to be the one to reach out and find out, did you receive that letter of recommendation? Because whoever's administering the scholarship is not going to reach out to all the applicants. I mean, it's potentially, they get thousands of applications. They're not going to reach out and say, did you get, or we did not get the letter of recommendation. The student has to be the one to reach out and find out, is this application complete? So they want to make sure that they're the ones reaching out. In terms of communication on the other end, even if a student applies for a scholarship, they may not even hear that they have been awarded the scholarship. So again, I'll get into that piece of it later, but the communication generally is on the part of the student to reach out, to ask questions, to make sure things are submitted. Another piece of making sure that you're going to be successful with scholarships is making sure they're actually eligible for the scholarship. So again, because scholarships have their own eligibility requirements, they can vary quite a bit. It's up to the student to know, am I going to be eligible for this particular scholarship? So for example, there may be a scholarship that is awarded to young women who plan to study engineering or plan to study in the sciences. So if you don't meet those criteria and you do apply, you certainly could apply, but whoever's looking at the scholarship applicants is going to say, oh, you don't meet these criteria, you're not going to be eligible. If you have to live in a particular town or a particular state, if you don't, you're not going to be eligible. One thing to know is that when you search for scholarships, the majority of scholarships, as a student, you're going to look at all of these scholarships potentially and find out, I'm not eligible for most of these. That is the case for everyone. So it's really important to know that, yes, there is tons of money out there. There are so many scholarships available, but most students are not going to be eligible for most scholarships. The key is to find out, what are the eligibility requirements? Do I meet them? And find the scholarships for which you as a student are going to be eligible. And then the final piece of this is understand that scholarships are competitive. So with federal grants or loans, with the Vermont state grants, if there are funds available, you're going to get them. If you're eligible for a federal grant or a federal loan, like the funds kind of don't run out. You apply and you're eligible, you will get those. With the Vermont state grant, yes, funds run out eventually, but as long as there's still funding, if you apply, your application is complete and you're eligible, you will get those funds. That is not the way it works with scholarships. So someone is offering a scholarship, they may only offer that to one person. They might offer it to 3, they might offer it to 10, depending on what they've decided. The key for you as a student when you're applying is to make yourself the best applicant you can possibly be. So you realize that it's a competition, you get your information in, you have everything is, as it should be, you're following the directions, you're doing everything you can to show that scholarship that you are the best one. They really want to pick you. Now, part of what I'm saying is here is you as the student is because scholarships are really a student-driven process. So any scholarship, the student has to be the one to apply. The student has to be the one to ask questions. The student has to be the one to get that letter of recommendation if it's required. So that anyone who's administering a scholarship is expecting students are going to be doing the work. So if a parent reaches out and says, did you get this? They're going to say, well, you're not the one who applied. We're not going to answer that question. So it really has to be a student-driven process. Students have to do the work for being successful if they want to get scholarships. All right, so let's talk a little bit about when do you do all of these things? So junior year is a time when you can find out about scholarships. So as I said, there are a lot of scholarships out there. Students will not be eligible for a lot of them. So the key is to do research and find out what scholarships are out there that you might be eligible for. So you want to do that research junior year if possible, because you want to find out, oh, here's a scholarship. It looks like I might be eligible. When is that due? What is required? Just finding out those things will save you time and stress, frankly, when you're going through this process. You don't have to do it during senior year. During senior year, you already have a lot of stuff to do when it comes to the process of applying for financial aid and so on. So any research you can do ahead of time with scholarships is going to make a difference. The other reason it's helpful to do junior year is that there are deadlines that are early. So for some scholarships, especially much more broad national scholarships, as a senior, you might have to apply in October for a scholarship that you're not going to get till the next year. So you're not going to use it till the following academic year, but you have to apply really, really early. So if you do that research during your junior year, you can find out, are there scholarships that I might be eligible for, but the deadline's early, so I want to make sure I can meet that deadline. Other than that, most scholarships are due in the spring of senior year, but the deadline can vary. It could be January, it could be April. They're kind of all over the place. So finding out what you need to do and by when can really help. So during senior year, Obviously you have to actually apply for college during your senior year. So one thing to be aware of is what are the deadlines for the colleges to which you're applying? Now, two deadlines when we talk about college deadlines. One is just the application deadline. So for students who are applying to college, there may be scholarships available directly from the college. Those scholarships require that students apply and are admitted. Often colleges will offer scholarships that students don't have to do anything else to apply for. So they just apply for admission, and because there's so much information in there, colleges will look at that and say, oh, here's a student, based on your grades or other information in your application. They'll say, great, you're eligible for a scholarship, and they will offer it to you as part of their acceptance. So this is, again, typically a merit-based scholarship that colleges will offer in that way. But there are some scholarships that colleges offer where it's limited. So they're not going to give it to everybody. They only give it to some students. If you apply early because you're already planning to apply for early action or early decision, you might be eligible for a scholarship that you might not be eligible for if you apply regular decision. Now, typically it's not an either or thing. You apply regular decision, you might still be considered, but you might be more likely to get it if you apply early because they have limited funds. So it's just one thing to consider. It's not necessarily a reason to apply early, but if you plan to apply early, or you might apply early, meet that early deadline, it's possible you'd be eligible for more funding from the college. So that's one deadline, is the application deadline. The other one is the financial aid deadline. So every college has their own deadline for when they require you to complete general financial aid forms. Now, for that, it typically means the FAFSA, the Vermont Grant Application. If a college has their own form, they're saying fill out these financial aid forms by a certain deadline. Usually that is different than the application deadline. So it's important that you find out when do you have to apply by, so you obviously get that deadline, but what is the financial aid deadline? Because that is often the deadline for scholarships from the school itself. So if there is a deadline, you want to make sure that you meet it. That's really key. So another way that you can find out about scholarships is through your high school counseling office. So most high schools have some way that they keep track of scholarships. Maybe it's a file drawer and they're actually paper applications and they print things out in there. Maybe it's a page on the website that's the student page for your high school. Maybe it's through Naviance or some other program that your school uses for college applications. Some schools are really great about it and they're going to constantly update that source, whatever it is, with scholarships. Some, schools don't update it as much. So if you can check in with your school counselor about, in general, if you're applying to college, that can be helpful, but about scholarships also. Do you know about any? Is there anything that you'd recommend that I do? Some schools have their own application for scholarships for students at that school. So if you go to a particular high school, there might be an application you fill out because you have to be a student at that high school to be eligible. So it's worth understanding if there are any of those, what is it that you have to do to be able to apply for? And because scholarships can kind of come up or counselors might learn about them, as the year goes on, kind of having those check-ins to find out, hey, do you know anything new? Then that would be helpful. So again, there are lots of other reasons you might check in with your school counselor, but when it comes to scholarship, that's one thing you might want to consider doing. Another thing to think about is the timeline for VSAC, because VSAC has a scholarship program. So you may know that VSAC administers the state grant, as I mentioned. VSAC has a loan program. When it comes to financial aid, another thing that VSAC offers is a scholarship program. So I'll get a little more details about that, but just know that if you want to apply for scholarships through VSAC, there is a date that you have to get everything in by. This year was in February. That's typically when it is. So just know that if you want to apply for any of those scholarships through VSAC, know what the deadline is and meet it. All right, so I mentioned that colleges and universities have scholarships of their own. So again, key thing is to make sure that you meet whatever deadline that they have. The other thing is that some colleges, if they have scholarships, there may be a separate application. So sometimes you can apply for scholarships through that college or university just by applying for admission. That's enough information, you will be considered. Other times they may have specific requirements for a scholarship, so they ask for other information. So there may be an application for some scholarships, even if not for all. So it's worth finding out. You're applying to a school and you're really interested in that school and you want to get the most out of it in terms of your financial aid. Go to their website, find the financial aid page. Usually there's a section on scholarships, and just see, is there anything in there I might apply for where I have to complete a separate application? If there is, make sure you do it and you do it on time. One thing to think about with scholarships is that it can affect your other financial aid. Now, at most schools, this will not be the case, but it can at some schools. Now, what I mean by that is that you apply for financial aid through some schools, they award you some money of their own, and you get another scholarship from an outside source. They may look at that and say, well, we've already given you plenty of money, so we're not going to give you as much if you get the scholarship. So say you get a scholarship for $5,000, they might say, well, we're going to reduce what we're giving you by $5,000. Now, typically that happens with schools that have generous financial aid. So if a school is the type of school that has enough money to be able to provide what students need to cover all their costs based on financial need, they may reduce funds that they're awarding because the student's getting a scholarship elsewhere. Essentially what they're saying is, we've given you everything you need. You have another scholarship coming in. Oh, well, we'll just give some money to someone else and you'll still have everything that you need. Again, that does not happen at most schools, but if you are applying to a school that does have generous financial aid, especially, make sure you find out what will happen if I get another scholarship. Now, at some schools, even if they do that, the first thing they're going to do is take away any loans that they may offer you. So the school may say, oh, if you want to attend here, you're eligible for a loan and we can offer you that. If you get a scholarship, we'll just reduce the loan. So it does benefit a student because, you know, they're going to have a scholarship instead of a loan, but it can have that impact. So it's just worth finding out with any school that you're interested in when you apply for financial aid, what does it mean if you get an outside scholarship? How does it affect the financial aid at that school? Luckily, most schools have really seen how that can have a big impact on students. And so typically what they say is, we're just going to add it on to whatever we've offered. But not all schools do that. So it's worth finding out. All right, so let's talk about the VSAC scholarship program that I mentioned. So VSAC has a scholarship program, and this started a bunch of years ago because what we saw at VSAC was students, if they want to apply for scholarship, they had to fill out application after application after application. So it would mean applying, if you want to apply to 20 scholarships, it's 20 different applications. So this started as a way to say, for Vermont students, is there a way we can consolidate this so students can apply one time for multiple scholarships? So this booklet that you can see here is a booklet of scholarships that are available to Vermonters. So everyone that's in here, a student has to be a Vermont resident in order to apply for. And there are two different kinds of scholarships in this booklet. The first one is the VSAC assisted scholarships. So these are ones where you can go through this booklet, whether it's online or the PDF version online or the paper booklet itself. And you can kind of go through each scholarship and you could see, what is the eligibility criteria for the scholarship? What do I need to apply, and so on. So you can kind of go through this and see like, oh, this one I'm not eligible for. No. Oh, here's one. I might be eligible for this. So you can apply for that. Say you find 5 in there you're eligible for and you want to apply for. The ones that are kind of in the front of the booklet that are the VSAC assisted scholarships, students can complete one online application to apply for those 5 scholarships, and they don't have to complete a separate application for all of them. For most students, it means filling out that application, which is information about you, your name and address or high school, what you may want to study, those kinds of things. So there's that general application. You're also going to include on there which scholarships do you want to apply for, so you would list them. Then you may have to do submit additional information. So you may have to do an essay or say a letter of recommendation. what has happened is, as we've consolidated this and tried to make it easier for most scholarships and for most students, it means completing the application, one essay, and one letter of recommendation. It's not the case for all students or for all scholarships, but generally that is the case. So it's fairly simple to apply for these. And the more in here you apply for, the less you have to do, because it may be that you're going through here and it's like, oh, I'm already doing that essay, I'm already getting that letter of recommendation. I just have to list another scholarship to apply for it. So the process is fairly simple. Students can apply once, they can upload documents online. It's great. So it really does simplify the process quite a bit. Again, the deadline for that is typically in February. It could be, March 1st. It varies year to year. So you want to check with that in the fall what the deadline is. The one other thing to know about this is that in this booklet, there are other scholarships listed that are not part of that process. So there are organizations or individuals or people who have a scholarship that say, I really want Vermont students to know about this, but I kind of want to do my own application process. So if you go to sort of the back part of the booklet, you can see scholarships that are in there that you have to be a Vermont resident, but that's the only thing that is in common. So they have their own criteria, and it will say on there what the deadline is. Could be different than the VSAC assisted scholarships. Maybe it's April 1st, or maybe it's May 1st. It could be whenever. So the deadline could be different, and it will also say in there, here's what you need to do to apply. It's going to be a separate application. So it's a way for you to see a variety of other scholarships you might be eligible for, but know that the application process is different. So I do want to make clear, as a student goes through this booklet, I've seen this time and again, they go through and like, I'm not available, or I'm not eligible for any of these. That is not the case. Everybody's eligible for at least one scholarship in the booklet. They can apply for that. But it is generally the case that a student is just not going to be eligible for the majority. If you can find 5 to 10, you're in great shape. That's going to be typical for a lot of students. It's not going to be all of the scholarships in there. So again, as it is true with the overall process for applying for scholarships, you're not going to be eligible for most of them. You want to find the ones you are eligible for. All right, so this booklet is available in October. The application for this is available starting October 1st. So you can start filling that out October 1st. But again, it's not going to be due for several months, so you have some time. It's available typically in school counseling offices. So VSAC will ship booklets to high schools, so you can pick one up. Lots of students like that because you can just go through with a pen and cross ones off you're not eligible for and circle them and so on. This first bullet on here, though, I will need to return to because this is really important. You have to follow the directions on here. So in this booklet, it will tell you if you are submitting an essay, here's what it needs to look like. Here's the format. Here's the information that needs to be included when you are completing this essay. So it will tell you exactly what you need to do. So as with other scholarships, these are competitive. You want to make sure that you submit the best application you can. If you don't follow the format, you leave something off of it, then it may be that you're just not eligible because you didn't follow the directions in the booklet. Same is true for letters of recommendation. There is a specific format for these scholarships that a student needs to, a recommender needs to use. So you just want to make sure if you're a student and you ask someone to complete it, you want to tell them, here's the format that you need to use. Maybe you even give them a copy of the page that says, please do this, and here's how you submit it. So follow the directions, meet the deadline, very key.
Matt?
Yes.
On the deadline, a question in the chat, is it too late for seniors this year who have been accepted to college, done the FAFSA, but haven't applied for VSAC scholarships yet? Just to clarify that. And if so, can they apply for next year?
It's a really good question. So the deadline for the VSAC assisted scholarships has passed. That was last month. However, because there are these other scholarships that are sort of toward the back of the book, there are still deadlines that are coming up. So it's worth looking in there to see, are there any scholarships in there where the deadline has not yet arrived and a student's eligible? And again, there are other scholarships outside of this booklet student might be eligible for. So it's worth looking just to see. As to part two of the question, students can apply for these every year. Now, one of the criteria may be that a student has to be a high school student in order to apply. So that means if a student is a senior right now and they've missed those VSAC assisted scholarships, then that's too bad for this year. For next year, some of the scholarships are going to say you have to be in high school. And so a student who is now in college can no longer apply for those. However, more and more scholarships in this booklet are open to everyone, which means if you're in high school, if you're already out of high school and attending college somewhere, you can apply. You can apply for these every year. If you applied for a scholarship that's open to anyone and you didn't get it, you can apply the next year. It's possible you could get it. So it's worth applying again every year, looking at this booklet to see, are there scholarships you could apply for? Any other questions lingering before I move on?
Thank you. There is one more on timelines. If a student takes a gap year, should they apply for scholarships their senior year or wait until the fall of the gap year, or both? Any drawbacks or penalties for applying more than once or in 2 different years?
Yeah, that's a good question. So if a student takes a gap year, they could wait to apply because again, you can do this every year. So that is definitely possible. There are some scholarships, because if they say a student has to be in high school to apply, then it's worth applying while that student is still a senior in high school, because it's possible that they could apply, be awarded the scholarship, and then defer it for a year so that they can actually get it. But if you wait, then you may not be able to apply because you have to be in high school in order to apply. So if you've already graduated, that's not an option. So you can apply for scholarships while you're still in high school. And then it's possible, it's not true for all scholarships, but for some of them, you may be able to defer so that even if you take a gap year, you can still get that scholarship down the road. But again, you want to apply every year anyway, because even if you didn't apply one year or you weren't awarded, you might be the next year.
Thank you.
All right. So when it comes to scholarships, I mentioned that there are, some of these big scholarships, Coca-Cola has a scholarship, which is this amazing, it's like lots of money. It's great. However, for a scholarship like that, you're going to have a lot of competition. So the scholarships that have the least competition, you're more likely to get. So you want to try, if you can, to focus on any scholarships that are local. So this would include, say, a scholarship where you have to attend a particular high school. There are a bunch of high schools in Vermont where you can get a scholarship if you are a senior at that high school. So like you go to Randolph Union High School, great scholarship program. If you do attend there, like it's awesome. Like there's a bunch of money for students who are seniors and going on to college. So you want to take advantage of that. Some are more competitive than others, but even if you attend the biggest high school in the state, think about like you're competing against only people who are other seniors and only those seniors who plan to continue their education after high school. So even the biggest high school in Vermont, like that's a very limited competition pool compared to something that is a giant corporation, a large scholarship, where there might be 10,000 applicants. So even if it feels like I go to a big high school, that your competition is going to be so much less. So it's worth applying. Some scholarships are available only to students in a particular town. So again, it may be someone that has said, I'm leaving behind some money after I die, and I'm going to, put it into a scholarship fund for students from my town. So it's worth checking, say, in your town office. Employers sometimes offer scholarships. So as a student, if you are working, it's possible that your employer has a scholarship that they offer. And it's sometimes possible that employers will offer scholarships to the dependents of people they work for. So what that means is that if you're a parent, your employer may offer a scholarship that you can then, give to your child. They can apply for it. So it's worth checking with employers as well. And then community groups like the Rotary, they often have scholarships for students who live in a particular town or particular region. So it's worth looking at those as well. So as I said, scholarships take work. So it's worth looking at as many sources as you can. Again, some high schools are going to be really good, and they're going to say, we're going to try to consolidate these all together. So you have to live in a particular town, or that Rotary scholarship, or employers in the area. Like, they're going to try and collect that for you. But if you don't see that there, if they just don't, it doesn't look like they have everything, it's worth checking with these other sources as well, because you want to find those local scholarships that have the least amount of competition. All right, but beyond that, there are plenty of other scholarships out there. So how do you find those? So there is the VSAC booklet. That's obviously one place that's sort of for Vermonters overall. And then if you want to do a search that's much more broad, some of these sites are places you can go. So a site like FastWeb or College Board or Unigo is somewhat similar. What happens is you go to these sites, you can create an account and you enter information about yourself. So it'll ask you just a whole bunch of questions about, where do you live? What kind of a student are you? What are your interests? It'll ask about, are you a veteran? Is your parent a veteran? Things like that. What kind of heritage might you have? And so it'll take all this information and filter out some of the scholarships where it just does not apply to you, and show you scholarships that you might be eligible for. Now, what I've seen is that they're not perfect. So sometimes it's like, there's a million scholarships in there. It'll filter it down to 100. And of those 100, you're going to look at those and say, this doesn't apply to me at all. But that's fine. You just have to weed through, because it's going to narrow it down quite a bit. So it's not going to give you a lot of scholarships you're just not going to be eligible for based on the information that you have entered. So the more detailed information you can put in, the better that search is going to be. A site like Unigo is helpful because not only do they do that, enter all this information, but you can save your essay in there. So you can keep it in one place and you can use it to apply, but they have some of their own scholarships. So directly through that site, you can apply. CapEx is another one that some students use for college searches and so on. They have a scholarship search. You can find these. At the end, we'll link to resources, so you don't have to necessarily write all this down. It'll be on the info sheets and so on. But these sites can be helpful because you can do a broader search for more scholarships. One thing to consider when looking at these broader scholarships is that, the more broad they are, the more competition, and the less likely you are to get them because of that. But also realize that some people will not apply simply because of that, because they say, I'm not going to be eligible for this, so they don't bother to apply. It's too much work. They don't bother to apply. So one way to think about it is just in terms of your time investment. So if you are willing to put in the time, the more scholarships you actually apply for, that alone is going to increase your odds. So let's just say you apply to 10 different scholarships and it takes you 20 hours of work. So it's 2 hours a piece. So you have to put in a bunch of time. They're all totally different. So you spent 20 hours applying for these scholarships, and 90% of them are a no. So you only get 1 out of those 10 for $2,000. Not even huge. It's not going to cover all your costs, but you get $2,000 for 20 hours of work. That's $100 an hour. That is a whole lot better than the job you're going to get as a high school student that likely pays minimum wage. So the more time you can invest, the more likely you are, especially if you are willing to follow directions, to be super clear, to be the best applicant you can be. That's how you increase your odds of getting scholarships. All right, so when we think about scholarships, just to sort of look at this from a different perspective. First, you have these broad scholarships, national scholarships, big corporations, giant foundations. They are going to give out big scholarships. They open this up to students, say, across the whole United States. That means a lot of applications. So that's the broad one that maybe you're the perfect candidate for, but guess what? There are a whole bunch of other perfect candidates. So it's worth applying if you're willing to put in the time, but understand you will have more competition. Then there are things like, say, the VSAC scholarship booklet. So some of those in there say you have to live in a particular town. Some are open to any Vermont resident. So Vermont is still a relatively small state. So, you're going to have competition potentially from students at high schools across the state, but still, that's a lot less than people from all across the United States. And then there are these really local ones. So anything that's local that you're eligible for, you're much more likely to get it. Even if it's only $500, you're much more likely to get $500 than the $50,000. It's worth applying for the local one. So make sure you apply for those local ones where you have less competition, even if the scholarship is smaller, just because you're more likely to get it. I would say if you're willing to put in the time and effort, apply for as many scholarships as you can, even if the competition is great. But if you have to pick, apply for the local one before the national one. All right, so I did say I would come back to this. So you may have heard about this idea of scholarship scams. Are they out there? Yes, they are out there and they are real. There are kind of some red flags for students as they're looking at scholarships. So really anything that says you have to pay, you really want to be wary of that. So they're saying, oh, you can get this. We just have to take a deposit for that. Give us a credit card number, bank account, so we'll take this deposit and then we'll give you a bigger scholarship or something like that. You really want to be wary of that because in general, you shouldn't have to pay to apply for money that's free. You're a finalist at a contest. That's another red flag. So someone says, hey, you've already, got this. You never applied for it. You didn't do anything. Then, again, you want to be wary of that. Now that's very different than like you're applying to college and they're offering you a scholarship because you have applied for it. But anything that just comes your way that says, hey, we're going to give you this and you really haven't had to do any work for it, that's what you want to be careful for. So students get on lists. So if you take the PSAT or the SAT or the ACT, or apply for an account somewhere, the students sometimes are on, say, an email list and people can buy those email lists and it gets out there. So, if you're a student, you may have seen this, you're already getting emails from colleges saying, hey, you should apply for our program. So other people potentially can get this and send things to you. So if anything is about a scholarship, some of these red flags here, watch out for those. If it's legit, you'll be able to go to their website, see the criteria. It's going to be free. You're going to have to put in some work for sure, but you'll have to put in some work. That's a key. All right, so just to review some of the things that you want to do to be successful with scholarships. First of all is find out what are you eligible for. So again, you're not going to be eligible for a lot, but you will be eligible for some if you search for them. So you want to find out the ones where you are going to be eligible to apply. Now, one thing to add about this is that sometimes scholarships are really specific and they will say, we are looking for students who have a 3.0 grade point average or who have scored a particular score on the SAT or the ACT. So they will say that's a minimum threshold. To be eligible for this, you have to meet that specific criteria. Other scholarships, for example, though, might say it is based on academic performance, which is somewhat broad. So the thing you want to realize is that it is a competition. So you're only competing against other students applying for that scholarship. So if it says it's based in part on academic performance, maybe you have the best academic performance of all the people applying, or maybe it's one of the best and other factors are more heavily weighed. So if it's broad enough, generally when it says academic performance or financial need, if it just says it's based on those things without specific criteria, it's generally worth applying. Don't not apply for something if it says it's based on financial need, at least in part, because maybe you have the most financial need of all the people applying for that particular scholarship. So in terms of eligibility, yes, some things are very specific. Other things are a little more broad. If it's broad, remember, it's a competition. So again, follow directions, mention this, especially like with the VSAC booklet, we know people apply for scholarships every year and they just haven't followed instructions. So it says your information has to be in by a certain date and you mail it the day after, or you try to upload it the day after, you've missed the deadline, you're just not going to be considered, period. If it says you need to submit an essay and you didn't, you're not going to be considered. If it says it has to be a certain format and it's not, you're not going to be considered. So it's important to follow those instructions. So going back to that communication piece, no one's going to say to you as a student, well, we got this essay, but it's not in the right format, or we never got that letter of recommendation. So you really want to follow instructions to make sure that you've submitted everything you need to submit and you've done it well, and you are the best candidate for that scholarship as much as you can be. Deadlines, again, really important. You miss the deadline, you're not going to be considered. I mean, that's just a done deal. Everything that is required should be in by the deadline, and find out what kind of deadline it is. If it's an online form and you're uploading something, often it means it's due by midnight of the deadline day, but sometimes it's not. I've seen a scholarship recently that said it had to be in by 5 o'clock of the deadline day, Eastern time. So it's like, you really want to make sure you meet the deadline. Sometimes that means the time, and other times it means you can mail things in, but it has to be postmarked by that date. So if you mail it on a Sunday, it doesn't get postmarked till the next day. Well, maybe you've missed the deadline because, it's a Sunday and they don't do mail on Sundays. So find out what kind of deadline is, and if there's a specific time to it, especially for uploading, what is that deadline? The other thing is, with deadlines, highly recommend you apply earlier than the deadline, because no one's going to tell you if something's missing. If you apply a week before the deadline, then you have time to get in touch and say, did you actually get that letter of recommendation? You never got a confirmation email, for example. You have time to follow up and say, I submitted this. I want to make sure that you actually got it. So you have time to say, I have questions. Can you please answer these? And typically you can find out. You'll get some answer that says, no, we don't have an application on file for you. And you realize, oh, I made a mistake. I never hit submit, whatever it is. And you have time to follow up to make sure that things are in. Letter of recommendation doesn't go in because that person forgot about it. You have time. You could say, hey, remember you said you would write this, and they're, oh yeah, I totally forgot. And they have time to submit it. So get things in early is generally to your benefit, but if nothing else, make sure that you meet the deadline. All right, so what happens after you apply? So you've done all this work to find scholarships, you're eligible, you've done all the work to submit, you've got letters of recommendation, essays, you provided all this information, filled out forms, and so on. So if you submit, everything is complete, you met the deadline, and you're good to go. Typically what happens is there is someone, a committee, a group of people who are going to look at all the applications that are complete and on time. Now, VSAC goes through this process with the VSAC assisted scholarships. So VSAC got a lot of experience doing this. And we know that, sometimes as many as half the applications that are submitted are discarded because they're late, or they're missing something, or they're just not complete in some way. So of all the ones that are left, there's usually a committee that will look at all of those applications. Now, you can know that for the most part, somebody's going to look at your application. They're going to read your essay, look at your letter of recommendation. They're going to make sure that everything in there is, is great. So they're then going to compare you to every other applicant and decide who the winner or winners are. Once that happens and the winners of a scholarship are selected, then the people who are the winners get notified. So the key thing with this notification, though, is you may not find out if you do not get it. So with the VSAC assisted scholarships, you can know if you apply, you're going to find out if you get it. You're going to find out if you are not awarded a scholarship. So that's one thing we know, and it's very helpful for students to know you were not awarded. Thanks for applying. Now, you're going to get that same notification if you went through the entire process and your application just didn't rise to the top, or it came in late and you just weren't even considered. So just know that one way or the other, you're going to get a notification from VSAC if you apply for those scholarships. Now, for some other scholarships, what may happen is they may say, we only notify the winners of the scholarship, and we will do so by this date. So they will often be upfront. You can go to the website to find, oh, here's this great scholarship. And they'll say, if you are selected, we will notify you by April 1st or whatever the date is. And we're not going to tell everyone else. So there's just too many, so they're not going to tell everyone. So typically, you can get in touch and say, I didn't hear from you. I just want to be sure. And maybe they'll tell you, no, you weren't selected, but you can often find that out ahead of time if you're going to be notified or not. All right, so key things to keep in mind is scholarships are competitive. So you really cannot stress this enough. Make sure you're eligible, get everything in you need to get in, do it on time, and do it well. So you want to really show, I am a really good fit for this particular scholarship. So if you're applying to a lot of scholarships, you could, there's a good chance you could take an essay and use it for multiple scholarships. I mean, for the VSAC scholarships, there is only one. So you want to make sure that you include the information that's relevant for any of the scholarships you're applying for. But let's just say you're applying to a bunch of other scholarships outside of that. If you just submit the exact same essay without looking at that carefully, it may not be the best essay for a particular scholarship. So you really want to address the criteria that they're looking for and be the best applicant you can be. Again, it takes more work, but if you want to have the best chances of getting a scholarship, you have to make sure you're addressing what they're looking for. So again, you want to look local first and then global. So the more you apply for, the more you might be eligible for. The more local, the more likely you are to be awarded because there's less competition. Again, think about how your overall financial aid might be affected by any scholarships that you get outside of, say, a college. And then watch out for scams. So those are kind of general things to keep in mind as you are looking at scholarships. All right, so if you have been taking notes along the way, that's great, but know that you can, 2 places on our website where you can get information. So if you just go to vsac.org and go to the scholarships tab, you'll find a paying for college tab, and there's information about scholarships in there. You could find links in there to some places to do a college search. That's where you can get the PDF of the scholarship booklet. You can request the scholarship booklet be sent to you, get general information about scholarships as well. And then for the college and career pathways, if you go to that site, which hopefully you saw because you registered for this event, if you go to the workshop resources tab, you'll find information about scholarships overall. So that includes this handout, which is kind of a summary of everything I've covered here. And it's got a bunch of links in there as well as some other information and links about scholarships overall. All right, so more information you can get here if you want to follow us in any way. That's it. So Shearson, what do we got for questions?
2 questions to start with. The first is, are awarded scholarships an annual award or an award for 4 years, or does it vary?
That's a good question. So it depends on the scholarship. So some scholarships will say that they are renewable. And what that means is if you are awarded, then the scholarship is renewable if you return to school the next year, the next year, the next year. So a scholarship, for example, might say this is renewable for up to 4 years. And so if you're awarded at the beginning, it's so many dollars that you can get in your first year, second year, and third year, fourth year, depending how long you're going to school. Now they may put a cap on that. So if you take a long time to go to school, then they may say, well, it's only up to 4 years. You can't get it beyond that, for example. So that's a renewable scholarship. Sometimes there are criteria attached to those. So for example, a college may say, we're going to give you a scholarship from our own funds. Congratulations. We want to have you, and we're going to give you this scholarship. It's renewable every year, but only if you maintain a certain grade point average. So you have to keep a 2.5 grade point average at minimum, or a 3.0, or whatever they've decided. So some scholarships are renewable, yes. There may be a limit to that, and there may be criteria in order to continue to have it be renewed. So that's one piece. Other scholarships are just for one year. So you may apply and you get it for that first year, and that's it. Maybe you can apply again, maybe not. Again, depends on the scholarship, but if it says it's renewable, you can get it for multiple years. If it doesn't say that, then you're only going to be able to get it for 1 year.
Thanks. Question about letters of recommendation, typically 1 or more. If 1, is it best to have one from teacher versus a coach versus a nonprofit where you may have volunteered?
Yeah, so this is letters of recommendation are similar to, but not the same as letters of recommendation for the general admissions process. So for admissions to a college, generally they say we want to have one from a teacher. If you want to submit another one from, say, a coach, that's great. For scholarships, you just want to make sure that you follow the criteria. So it may say, we need a letter of recommendation from someone who's not related to you, who knows you as a student, in which case you probably want to get one from a teacher. So whatever the criteria is for the scholarship, you want to make sure you follow the directions for that. The person you ask for that, it really does depend on the criteria for the scholarship. So if the most important thing they're looking for is students who show perseverance, then maybe that coach is the best person because you've been able to demonstrate with that person. They know you in that way. If it's focused more on academics, you want to ask a teacher. So again, it really does depend who you ask. The one other thing about letters, though, is that typically scholarships are going to say, this is what we need for letters of recommendation. And if they say we need one, it's not necessarily to your benefit to submit more than one. You want to follow those directions. If they say we need one letter of recommendation, submit one letter of recommendation. If they say they want two, submit two. If they say up to two, then you can submit two. And I would recommend doing that because you want to be the best applicant. So I guess the answer is it depends.
Great. One more question. What are the best things to do in your junior year to make yourself eligible for the most scholarships?
That's a really good question. Scholarships really depend on quite a bit. There are a good number of them now that where community service is a criteria. And so you may have to have done community service to be eligible, first of all, but you may have to get a letter of recommendation from someone, with whom you did that community service. So you volunteer at the animal shelter, you get a letter of recommendation from the person at the animal shelter you worked with, like who was kind of like your boss when you volunteered, kind of thing. So volunteering can be one, something that is meaningful and something that, matters to you is going to be better than just doing, a bunch of things that you're just to get it in. So again, like if you want to be the best candidate for a scholarship, you've done something that is meaningful, that's going to meet the criteria. So volunteering is certainly one thing, because I've seen students who just haven't really done any community service and their scholarship, they just can't apply for it because it's not something that they've done. And the other thing is that, grades can be money. So because scholarships can require academic performance, then the better you do academically, the more scholarships you can apply for. So if a scholarship says you have to have a 3.0 and you don't, well, you're not going to be eligible. So the better you do academically, the more scholarships you can apply for. Now, that doesn't mean you'll get them. And it doesn't mean that if you don't do really well academically, there aren't plenty of other scholarships, but it is something you can do. So think about doing community service and doing the best you can in school is going to benefit you. So those are kind of the two big ones, I would say.
Thanks, Matt. Let's take one last one before we wrap, which is if students and families are asking for letters from schools if students and families are asking for letters for college applications as well as for scholarships, it seems like a large burden on teachers. How open are they to doing so many letters typically?
Yeah, that's a good question. So if you have already asked a teacher and you have to say, oh, can you submit, something else? Sometimes you can use the same letter. Generally, though, for a scholarship, you're not going to use the same letter of recommendation for college admission as you would for a scholarship. But what I've seen is that often teachers are open to doing that. They've already written a letter, and if you give them really specific criteria, say, you got to change the format a little or really address something like community service or whatever it might be, they can take the letter they've already written and modify it. And yes, it takes time. And yes, it is something you're asking from them. But I've seen a lot of teachers who are just they're receptive to doing that, especially if they've already done it once. It's a whole lot easier to modify something than to start from scratch. So yes, it's true that, you really want to be aware of that because you don't want to ask the same person for a whole bunch of things over and over and over and over, especially if other students are asking. But I'd say, be really clear, ask early, can you do this for me? and, you know, just ask them really upfront. If you feel like you're not going to have time to do this, let me know so you can ask somebody else.
Great, thanks. Those are the questions in the Q&A.
Excellent. So, all right, so let's wrap up. So thanks everybody for attending. Hopefully this was useful on a cold Saturday. Again, if you have other questions, I would say go to our website. You can search on there. You can look at the resources, and hopefully you can get a lot of your questions answered that way. And you can always get in touch with VSAC in other ways if you have specific questions. But I would say, you know, look to financial aid offices at colleges as well, and your school counselors if you're a student who's in high school now, as other resources to get help as well.
Thank you so much, Beagle.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Hope you have a great day.